The world believes a lion never asked for help. That belief shattered just after sunrise on the open plains of the Serengeti. Karim stood alone in the grass, a full-grown male with a golden-tan coat dulled by dust and exhaustion, his dark mane heavy against his shoulders. He was the kind of lion people imagine when they hear the phrase king of the wild, strong, untouchable fear. And yet this morning Karim was doing something no lion was supposed to do. He was looking for humans, not stalking them, not avoiding them, searching. 5 days earlier, Karim would have torn apart anything that dared approach his territory. 5 days earlier, he had a future mapped by instinct hunt control survive. But instinct had failed him. And now beneath an acacia tree not far behind him lay the reason: Amani. His cub was only a few months old, small, even by cub standards, his pale golden fur still soft with youth. The left side of Amani's face was grotesquely swollen, the eye buried beneath tight, inflamed skin that glistened unnaturally in the morning light. It looked as though something inside was pushing outward, desperate to escape. With every shallow breath, Amani's body trembled. Karim had not eaten in 5 days. He had not slept. He had done nothing but stand guard, pressing his body between his son and the sun, the cold, the scavengers that came closer each night. Hyenas laughed in the darkness. Vultures circled lower with each passing day. The rest of the pride had already moved on. Sick cubs carried the scent of death, and the wild does not wait. Karim stayed. On the first day, he believed it would pass. Cubs got injured, cubs recovered. That was how life worked out here. But by the second night, Amani stopped playing. By the third morning, he could no longer walk straight. By the fourth, he collapsed every time he tried to stand. And on the fifth day, Amani did not get up at all. Karim lowered his massive head and nudged his son gently with his nose. "Come on," he rumbled softly, a sound meant only for the cub. Amani twitched but didn't rise. His breathing was thin, uneven, as if each breath had to be negotiated. Karim licked the side of Amani's face, careful at first. When his tongue brushed the swollen area, the cub flinched violently and let out a weak, broken cry. Karim pulled back at once, ears flattening. He had faced rival males stampeding buffalo, even the crack of distant rifles in the past. None of it felt like this. This was helplessness. The swelling had started as nothing more than irritation dust in the wind, a scratch too small to notice. But the savanna carries more than grass and sunlight. Infection had crept in, quietly building pressure where Karim could not reach, could not bite, could not fight. The wild had no remedy for this. Karim stood over his son and scanned the horizon. Heat shimmered above the plains. Somewhere far away, antelope moved. Somewhere else, water reflected the sun. None of it mattered. His world had narrowed to the fragile rise and fall of Amani's chest. If I stay, something deep inside him understood he dies. It was not a thought in words. It was instinct turned inside out. Karim had seen this ending before. Cubs that stopped moving. Cubs that grew quiet. Cubs that the vultures noticed before anyone else did. The wild rewarded strength and speed. It had no patience for sickness. Amani let out a faint whimper, barely louder than the wind. Karim lowered himself beside the cub, pressing his flank against Amani's small body, sharing what warmth he could. He closed his eyes for a moment, memorizing the feel of his son's breathing, the weight of him, the smell that told him Amani was still alive. But the smell was changing. There was a sharpness now, something wrong, something that did not belong to the earth or the grass. Karim lifted his head again. His muscles trembled not from hunger alone, but from the strain of holding back every instinct screaming at him to stay. Then he saw it. Far beyond the grasslands, a faint glint caught the light metal glass movement that did not belong to the wild. The memory came back to him uninvited. Seasons ago, when Karim was younger, something sharp had torn into his leg during a territorial fight. He had been unable to run, unable to hide. A roaring machine had appeared. Darkness followed. When he woke, the pain was gone. The smells had been strange, sharp, clean. Hands had touched him without fear, without teeth or claws. He had fled the moment he could stand, pride, intact instinct restored. Trust had never been part of the bargain until now. Karim looked back at Amani. The cub's breathing faltered, then resumed weaker than before. The swollen eye looked as though it might split open at any moment. Karim made a sound low in his chest, not a roar, not a warning, a sound of decision. He stood. For a long moment, he didn't move. Every part of him rebelled. No lion left a cub behind. No lion walked toward humans. This was how lions died. But staying was no longer protection. Staying was surrender. Karim turned away from his son. Each step felt wrong, like tearing muscle from bone. He stopped after only a few paces and looked back. Amani lay exactly as he had been, small and still against the earth. Karim forced himself to keep walking. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down on his back. His tongue hung heavy from his mouth as he moved faster now, driven by something beyond hunger or fear. He followed the distant scent of fuel and dust, the low hum of machines carried by the wind. When the vehicles finally came into view, Karim stepped into the open. The humans froze. One raised binoculars. Another lifted a hand instinctively, as if to shield themselves. Lions did not approach like this. Lions did not walk openly toward danger. Karim stopped, turned away, then looked back at them. "Come." He took a few steps, paused, and looked again. One of the humans spoke, voice tight with disbelief. "Is he leading us?" Karim repeated the movement. "Walk, turn, look, wait." His chest burned. His legs shook. Behind him, somewhere in the grass, a cub was dying. Karim lifted his head and roared, not in anger, not in threat, but in something closer to a plea. The sound rolled across the plains, heavy and raw, carrying everything he could not say. The humans moved, and in that moment the king of the wild broke every rule he had ever lived by, not for power, not for survival, but for love. For 5 days, Karim fought a battle no one could see. It wasn't the kind of fight the wild respected. There were no claws bared, no roars echoing across the plains, no rivals to drive away. This was quieter, slower, more punishing. And it demanded everything he had. By the end of the first day without food, hunger gnawed at him sharp and insistent. Karim knew that feeling well. Hunger was familiar. Hunger could be answered with a hunt. But this time, every instinct to leave was overruled by the fragile body pressed against the earth beneath the acacia tree. Amani needed shade, so Karim stood between his son and the sun, hour after hour, letting the heat bake his own back instead. The African sun showed no mercy. It burned through the morning, climbed overhead, and settled like a weight on his shoulders. Karim barely shifted. When he did, it was only to reposition his shadow, so it still covered the cub's small frame. By the second day, the hunger had changed. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was weakness. His muscles built for explosive speed, and power began to soften. His steps felt heavier when he circled the tree. His breath came faster even when he was still. Amani's condition worsened. The cub's head tilted slightly to one side, now pulled by the swelling around his left eye. When he tried to move, his paws no longer landed where he intended. He staggered, bumped into Karim's legs, and collapsed in confusion. Once he let out a frightened sound, not loud, not dramatic, just a thin cry that carried the simple message of a child who no longer understood his own body. Karim lowered his head and nudged him upright, steadying him with his chest. He stood directly in front of Amani, broad and unmoving, creating something solid for the cub to focus on. "Look at me," Karim seemed to say without words. "Follow me." Amani tried. His paws pushed into the dust. His legs trembled violently. For a moment, hope flared. Then his knees buckled and he fell hard onto his side, breathing fast, eyes unfocused. Karim froze. This was not how cubs behaved. This was not clumsiness or fatigue. This was something deeper, something wrong. Karim licked the top of Amani's head, slow and deliberate, the way fathers do when there is nothing else left to offer. The cub's body shuddered beneath his tongue. By the third night, the scavengers came closer. Hyenas appeared at the edge of the darkness, their silhouettes low and patient. They did not rush. They laughed softly, testing, waiting. Karim rose at once, mane bristling, and roared with everything his chest could summon. The sound tore through the night, a warning older than memory. The hyenas backed off, but Karim knew the truth. They always came back. The effort cost him more than he expected. When he returned to Amani's side, his legs shook. He lay down briefly, not to rest, but to keep from falling. His body was beginning to betray him. 5 days without food was no small thing, even for a lion like Karim. Still, he stayed. On the 4th day, the smell reached him. It was faint at first, carried on the wind beneath the familiar scent of his cub's fur. Sharp, sour, wrong. Karim lifted his head and sniffed the air, ears flicking. The wild was a world of smells, and this one spoke clearly. Infection, decay, time running out. Amani no longer tried to stand. He lay curled awkwardly on his side, his breathing shallow, uneven. The swelling around his eye had grown taut and glossy, stretching the skin until it looked fragile, as if it might tear. Heat radiated from the area. Karim could feel it even without touching. He lay beside his son, pressing his body close, sharing warmth through the night. Every so often, Amani twitched or shuddered, caught in a wave of pain that Karim could neither see nor stop. Each time, Karim responded instantly, lifting his head, nudging the cub, rumbling softly in his chest. "I'm here," the sound said. "I'm still here." But presence was no longer enough. By the fifth morning, Karim felt hollow. His stomach cramped painfully. His vision blurred at the edges when he stood. Even lifting his head took effort. The lion who once commanded the plains now moved slowly, deliberately, conserving energy he did not have to spare. Amani had not moved since before dawn. Karim nudged him once, then again firmer this time. The cub's ear flicked weakly, but his eyes did not open. His chest rose and fell so lightly that Karim found himself watching, counting, afraid to look away. He lowered his head until his forehead rested against Amani's small skull. For a long moment, neither moved. The world went on around them. Birds called. The grass shifted in the breeze. Somewhere life continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. But for Karim, everything had narrowed to a single truth. Staying meant watching his son fade. Hunting would not save him. Guarding would not save him. Love alone would not save him. The wild had no answers for sickness like this. No remedy hidden in the grass. No mercy for the weak, no matter how young. Karim lifted his head and scanned the horizon again, his gaze slower, now heavy with exhaustion. The scavengers were already awake, perched on distant trees, dark shapes against the sky. They knew what he was trying not to admit. Amani let out a faint, breathy sound, more sigh than cry. Karim responded instantly, rising to his feet despite the protest in his muscles. He stood over his son, blocking the sun, blocking the world, as he had done for days. But something inside him shifted. It was not fear, it was clarity. For 5 days, Karim had fought in silence, sacrificing his own strength, piece by piece. He had given everything the wild had taught him to give, and it was not enough. If his son was going to live, the answer would not come from staying. That realization settled deep, heavy, and irreversible. Karim looked down at Amani one last time, memorizing the curve of his body, the sound of his breathing, the warmth still present beneath his fur. Then he turned his gaze outward toward a world he had always avoided. For the first time, Karim understood that being a father sometimes meant walking away, not to abandon, but to save. The decision did not come all at once. It arrived in fragments, quiet, heavy moments that pressed against Karim's instincts until they finally broke through. He stood at the edge of the clearing, longer than he meant to, his body angled toward Amani, his head turned toward the horizon. The pull in opposite directions felt physical, like a rope stretched tight across his chest. Every rule he had lived by screamed at him to stay. A lion did not leave his cub. A lion did not walk away from weakness. A lion certainly did not move toward humans. And yet nothing about this situation followed the rules anymore. Karim had lived long enough to know when a battle could be won and when it could not. He had lost territory before. He had lost fights. He had lost members of his pride. Loss was part of the wild. But this was different. This was not defeat at the claws of another male or the hunger of a dry season. This was something invisible, something his strength could not touch. He closed his eyes just briefly and a memory surfaced. Years ago, on the southern edge of Kruger National Park, Karim had been younger and reckless. A territorial clash had gone wrong. A sharp pain had torn through his hind leg, followed by blood, then weakness. He had tried to run. He had failed. The sound that followed was unlike anything in the wild, a low mechanical growl that vibrated through the ground. Humans. He remembered the panic, the instinct to attack, the sudden sting that sent him into darkness. When he woke, the pain was gone. His legs still ached, but the tearing agony had vanished. The smell had been sharp and clean, unlike anything in nature. Hands had moved quickly, deliberately, without cruelty. He had escaped the first chance he got, pride wounded, but body mended. At the time, he had buried the memory. Survival demanded it. Now it returned with force. Kareem opened his eyes and looked back at Amani. The cub lay motionless, chest barely lifting. The swelling at his eye had worsened, pulling his small head at an unnatural angle. Kareem took a step toward him, then stopped. If I stay, I watch him die. The thought landed with finality. Kareem turned away. His body resisted at once. His muscles tightened, his paws hesitated, his head snapped back toward the tree. Amani had not moved. The sight nearly pulled Kareem back, nearly undid him. He stood there breathing hard, heart pounding louder than any roar. Then he forced himself forward. Each step away felt wrong. The ground seemed to shift beneath him. He moved slowly at first, ears swiveling constantly, every instinct warning him that he was exposing himself, leaving behind the one thing that mattered. After a few dozen steps, he stopped and looked back. Amani was still there, still breathing. Kareem continued. The farther he walked, the heavier the air seemed to become. Hunger clawed at his insides, but he ignored it. His body had already learned that food was no longer the priority. The land stretched wide and open, offering no cover, no comfort. Heat shimmered above the grass. Dust coated his tongue. Then he heard it, a low, distant sound, unnatural and steady. Not thunder, not hooves, not wind. Kareem lifted his head and angled his ears. The sound came again, clearer now. Engines. He followed it. When the vehicles came into view, Kareem slowed. Two trucks moved along a dirt track, raising plumes of dust behind them. The scent hit him moments later, fuel rubber metal. His muscles coiled instinctively, preparing for flight or attack. Instead, he stepped into the open. The truck stopped. Doors opened cautiously. Humans stepped out, their movements tense, uncertain. Kareem could feel their eyes on him, wide with disbelief. He knew what they saw, a full-grown male lion, thin, exhausted, standing in the open with no attempt to hide. This was not how lions behaved. Kareem took a few steps forward, then turned away deliberately. He walked several paces, stopped, and looked back over his shoulder. The humans did not move. Kareem repeated the motion. Walk, turn, look, wait. One of the humans spoke, voice tight. What is he doing? Another shook his head slowly. I don't know, but he's not threatening us. Kareem's legs trembled as he waited. His strength was fading faster now, drained by hunger and stress. He could not afford hesitation. He turned and walked again, more urgently this time, glancing back every few steps. Finally, one of the humans took a cautious step forward, then another. Relief surged through Kareem, sharp and overwhelming. He did not slow. He led them away from the road across open ground, choosing the most direct path back to the tree. The humans followed at a careful distance, speaking quietly, struggling to keep up as the sun climbed higher. Hours passed. Kareem did not stop for water. He did not rest. Each step was driven by a single thought: stay ahead. Keep them moving. Don't let them turn back. When his vision blurred, he slowed just enough to steady himself, then continued. When his legs shook, he adjusted his pace but never stopped. Once he paused at the crest of a low rise and looked back fully at the group. Their faces were strained now, expressions no longer curious but concerned. One of them wiped sweat from his brow. Another adjusted a pack slung over her shoulder. She's right, one of them muttered. This is intentional. Kareem turned and continued. As they neared the acacia tree, a familiar shape appeared on the horizon. Dark birds perched in the distance, watching. Vultures. Kareem's pace quickened despite the pain in his limbs. He let out a low, urgent sound and glanced back sharply. Something's wrong, one of the humans said. He's rushing. When Kareem reached the clearing, he stopped abruptly. This time he did not turn back. He stood aside and waited. The humans approached slowly, their steps careful, their voices gone. When they saw Amani, everything changed. One of them dropped to their knees immediately. Another swore under his breath. A third began opening a pack with shaking hands. Kareem remained where he was, chest heaving, eyes locked on the cub. He had done it. He had made the choice no lion ever makes, not out of weakness, but out of love that refused to accept the limits of the wild. The moment the humans reached the clearing, time seemed to tighten. Kareem stood just beyond the shade of the acacia tree, his body angled between the strangers and his son. His chest rose and fell heavily. Every instinct inside him was awake, now coiled and dangerous. He had led them here, but that did not mean he trusted them. Not yet. Doctor. Emily Carter was the first to kneel beside Amani. She moved slowly, deliberately, making sure every step was visible. Her voice was calm, low, the kind used around frightened children and wounded animals alike. "Easy," she said, though she didn't know if the lion could understand the word. "We see him." Daniel Brooks hovered just behind her, already pulling on gloves, his eyes flicking repeatedly to Kareem. "The swelling is severe," he murmured. "Way beyond inflammation." Emily nodded but didn't look away from the cub. Up close, the damage was unmistakable. Amani's left eye was buried beneath swollen tissue, stretched tight and glossy, the skin discolored and hot to the touch. His breathing was shallow, irregular. Too slow, too weak. "This isn't something that resolves on its own," Emily said quietly. "It's an abscess. Deep, possibly septic." Daniel swallowed. "If the pressure isn't relieved soon, he won't last." Emily finished. Kareem took a step forward. The air changed instantly. Daniel froze, one hand mid-motion. Someone behind them sucked in a sharp breath. Kareem's head lowered slightly, his shoulders tightening, his dark mane bristling as a low rumble built in his chest. Emily didn't run. Instead, she did something unexpected. She slowly lowered herself all the way to the ground, sitting cross-legged beside Amani. She placed both hands flat on the earth, palms down, and bowed her head just enough to break eye contact. "I'm not a threat," she said softly, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I'm here to help your son." The rumble in Kareem's chest deepened, then softened. He stopped. The distance between instinct and trust had narrowed to a fragile line. Daniel leaned closer, his movements careful, efficient. "We need to act now," he whispered. "Local anesthetic, drainage kit, antibiotics ready." Emily nodded. "No tranquilizers," she said firmly. "Not with him this close. We do this awake." Daniel hesitated. "That's risky." "So is losing the cub," Emily replied. They worked quickly but quietly. Emily cleaned the area around the swollen eye, her hands steady, her focus absolute. Amani twitched weakly as the antiseptic touched his skin, a faint sound escaping his throat. Kareem reacted instantly. He stepped forward again, faster this time. "Kareem," Emily said, her voice firm but gentle. She lifted one hand slowly, palm open, not toward him, but toward Amani. "I know this hurts. I know you want it to stop. So do we." Kareem stopped short of her. His eyes locked onto her face, dark and unblinking. For a moment that stretched unbearably long, no one moved. Then with visible effort, Kareem lowered his body and sat down heavily in the grass. Not relaxed, not calm, but restrained. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's do it." The local anesthetic took effect quickly. Emily steadied Amani's head, cradling it with a care that felt almost maternal. Daniel positioned the scalpel, his jaw tight. "This will release the pressure," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "That's what's killing him." He made the incision. The response was immediate. A thick stream of cloudy fluid burst from the wound, carrying with it an unmistakable smell of deep infection. The pressure that had been building for days released all at once. Amani jerked, then let out a faint sound, weak but alive. Kareem surged to his feet. Emily raised her voice for the first time. "No," she said, clear and strong. "We're helping him. Look." Kareem hesitated, his gaze flicking from Emily's face to his son. The cub's breathing changed. It deepened, slightly steadied. The rigid tension in his small body eased. Kareem stood frozen, caught between fear and recognition. Daniel flushed the wound thoroughly, washing away infection that had been poisoning the cub from the inside. Antibiotic ointment followed, then careful bandaging, soft, breathable, designed to protect without restricting. Emily kept one hand on Amani's chest the entire time, feeling the heartbeat beneath her palm. "That's it," she murmured. "Stay with us, little guy." Minutes passed, then more. The swelling began to recede, not dramatically, not miraculously, but enough to see the difference, enough to matter. Amani's breathing stabilized further. His muscles relaxed into the ground. Kareem took a slow step closer. No one stopped him. He lowered his massive head, sniffing the air near his son, then near Emily's hands. The scent was strange but not threatening. Clean, controlled, different from the sharp decay he'd smelled before. Kareem lay down beside Amani, his body forming a barrier between the cub and the rest of the world. He did not touch him, but the space between them closed in a way that said everything. Emily sat back on her heels, exhaustion washing over her. "He's stable," she said quietly. "Not out of danger, but he has a chance now." Daniel nodded, wiping his hands. "We'll monitor from a distance. Antibiotics are in. If the infection responds, he could recover fully." Kareem remained still, his head lowered near his son, eyes half-lidded, but alert. Trust had not replaced instinct, but for this moment it had stood beside it, and that was enough. Dawn arrived quietly. There was no urgency in the light this time, no harsh glare pushing the world awake. The sun rose slowly over the Serengeti, washing the plains in a soft gold that felt almost gentle. The air was cooler than it had been in days, carrying the familiar scent of grass and dust instead of sickness. Amani stirred. It was subtle at first, a faint twitch of his paw, a shift in his shoulders beneath the bandage that wrapped his face. Kareem noticed instantly. He lifted his head muscles, tightening out of habit, then relaxed when he saw the movement was real. His son was waking up. Amani's breathing was steadier now, deeper than it had been in days. The terrifying shallowness was gone. He let out a small sound, not a cry, not a whimper, just a low, uncertain breath, as if testing the world again. Slowly, carefully, he opened his right eye. Just one. But that single blink changed everything. Kareem leaned closer, pressing his nose gently against Amani's side. The cub responded by shifting toward the warmth, instinctively seeking the familiar presence that had never left him. For the first time since the sickness began, Kareem allowed himself to lie down fully beside his son, not hovering, not braced for attack, but resting. Nearby, Dr. Emily Carter watched through binoculars from a respectful distance. The team had pulled back at first light, retreating toward their vehicles to give the lion space. Intervention had ended. Observation was all that remained. "He's responding," Daniel Brooks said quietly, lowering his own binoculars. "That's a good sign," Emily nodded. "His breathing is strong. The drainage worked. Now his body just has to do what it was meant to do." They stayed where they were careful not to intrude. In wildlife work, knowing when to step back mattered just as much as knowing when to act. As the morning warmed, Amani attempted something that made everyone freeze. He tried to sit up. His movements were slow and awkward. His neck wobbled, muscles weak from days of illness and dehydration. He leaned too far to one side and nearly collapsed, but Kareem was there instantly, adjusting his position, offering his shoulder as support. Amani steadied himself. For a brief, fragile moment, he sat upright. Emily felt her chest tighten. "He's doing it," she whispered. Kareem lowered his head and touched his nose to Amani's forehead, holding him steady until the cub eased back down into the grass. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Over the next hours, the change continued. The swelling beneath the bandage receded further, the tight shine of the skin softening as circulation returned to normal. Amani drank small amounts of water the team had discreetly placed nearby his tongue, flicking hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Later, he accepted a few bites of soft food, guided gently by Kareem's presence. Each small victory built upon the last. Emily and Daniel returned twice that day, always from a distance, checking the bandage, monitoring signs of fever or renewed swelling. They spoke quietly, recording notes, sending updates back to colleagues. No one suggested relocation. Kareem's posture alone made it clear that this family would not be separated. "He won't let us take him," Daniel said softly. Emily smiled faintly. "I wouldn't either." By the third day, Amani stood on his own. It took effort, and his steps were short and unsteady, but he stood. Kareem watched closely, ready to intervene, his body angled protectively. When Amani managed a few careful steps toward him, Kareem lowered his head and rumbled softly, a sound deep with reassurance. That was when the tension finally left him. For days, Kareem had lived in a constant state of readiness, every muscle prepared for loss. Now, as his son moved under his own power, something loosened inside him. He still guarded, he still watched, but the raw edge of fear had dulled. The infection continued to recede. The bandage was removed under observation, revealing healing tissue beneath. Amani squinted against the light but did not recoil. There would be scars, perhaps some permanent damage, but he was alive. He would grow. News of the rescue spread quickly. Images captured from a distance showed a lion cub rising beside his father, alive against all odds. Wildlife networks picked up the footage. Conservation groups shared the story. Messages poured in from around the world. Parents, veterans, caregivers, people who recognized something familiar in the choices Kareem had made. Emily read some of them aloud one evening as the sun dipped low. "They're calling it a miracle," she said. Daniel shook his head. It wasn't a miracle, it was a decision. Kareem had returned to hunting, by then moving cautiously, at first rebuilding strength, lost during the long vigil. Each successful hunt brought more stability, more safety. Imani stayed close, watching, learning, his curiosity slowly returning. One afternoon, Imani chased a grasshopper. He didn't catch it. He stumbled, recovered, and tried again. Kareem watched from nearby, alert but calm. The cub's small failures no longer carried the weight of danger. They were simply part of growing up. Emily visited the site one last time before the team moved on. She stood at the edge of the clearing, hands resting at her sides, watching father and son in silence. Kareem noticed her. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. There was no threat in his gaze, no fear, just acknowledgement. Emily nodded once, then turned away. As the truck rolled back toward the reserve road, the planes returned to their familiar quiet. No engines, no voices. Just wind through the grass and the steady rhythm of life continuing. In the days that followed, Imani grew stronger. The wild reclaimed its place around him, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Kareem resumed his role not as a king, but as what he had proven himself to be all along, a father willing to cross every boundary for his child. People would talk about the story for a long time. They would debate instinct, intelligence, emotion. They would argue about where the line between animal and human truly lay. But for Kareem and Imani, none of that mattered. What mattered was that when the wild offered no answers, love found one anyway. And on that quiet morning beneath the open sky, the wild remembered it too. In the end, this story was never just about a lion or a rescue on the African plains. It was about a choice. Kareem did not save his son because he was the strongest animal in the savannah. Strength alone failed him. Territory failed him. Instinct failed him. Everything the wild had taught him, every rule that had kept him alive, ran out of answers when his child began to fade. What saved Imani was not power, but courage of a different kind. Kareem chose to do what no lion was meant to do. He chose vulnerability over pride. He chose hope over certainty. And most importantly, he chose to act when staying still felt safer. For 5 days, he fought silently, giving up food, rest, and strength, until he realized that love sometimes demands something even harder than endurance. It demands change. That is what makes this story resonate far beyond the savannah. Because in our own lives, many of us face moments, just like Kareem's moments, where the tools that once worked no longer do. We try harder. We push longer. We stay loyal to habits, beliefs, or roles that once protected us. And yet the problem remains. A child struggles. A family member suffers. A relationship breaks down. A life reaches a point where strength alone is no longer enough. The lesson here is not that we should abandon who we are. It's that sometimes being who we are means having the courage to evolve. Kareem did not stop being a lion when he sought help. He became a better father. And that lesson matters deeply in today's world. For parents, it's a reminder that love isn't measured by how much we endure in silence, but by whether we're willing to ask for help when our children need more than we can give alone. For leaders, it's a reminder that authority does not come from never needing others. It comes from knowing when collaboration saves lives. For anyone watching this who has ever felt trapped by pride, fear, or the belief that I should handle this on my own, this story offers something powerful: permission. Permission to reach out. Permission to change course. Permission to trust that asking for help is not weakness, it is wisdom. Imani survived not because the wild softened, but because love refused to accept its limits. And that same truth applies to us. When the rules of our world no longer serve the people we care about, we are allowed, sometimes required, to break them. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or if it encouraged you to see strength in a new way, then you already understand why stories like this matter. They remind us who we are at our best. If you want to support more true emotional stories from the wild stories of courage, connection, and the quiet power of love, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep sharing meaningful journeys like this one. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing that even in the wildest places on earth, love still finds a way.